Let's make a start then. Welcome everyone. I think I know everyone who's online, but just in case I don't or you don't know me, I'm Stephen Ritchie from ITS, and welcome to our seminar today. It's Wednesday, the 29th of July, 2020. And our speaker today is Dr. Behdad Kiani. And let me just provide a little background information. He's a project scientist actually at ITS Davis, and he studies vehicle grid interaction of zero emission vehicles, as well as hydrogen infrastructure, storage systems for utilities, load management, and renewable energy penetration. So this is a great background and topic that we'll get to in a moment that he's going to present today. He has a lot of experience, 20 years of experience in techno-economic optimization and integrated energy systems modeling. And prior to joining UC Davis, he was an adjunct faculty and research associate at UBC, British Columbia, and University of Victoria in Canada. I believe he's been at Davis since 2017 and has been an acting principal investigator and senior researcher at Davis within several programs: Energy Futures, Sustainable Freight, and the Three Revolutions programs, and also for Caltrans. He holds a PhD degree in energy systems engineering from the Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology. And his topic today is ZEV vehicle adoption for 2045 emission-free transportation sector in California and for high renewable energy penetration. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kiani, but let me just mention that I think everyone is free to ask questions during the session. I think we've lifted restrictions, so I think if you wish to ask a question during the session, during the seminar, that should be fine. So I'll hand it over to you, Behdad. Away you go.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me to have a presentation at UC Irvine, and I hope you don't mind I put your background in my images. So let me screen share you the PowerPoint and go to the view mode here. Yes, so going forward, this is a study that I've been doing at ITS UC Davis. It's a Z vehicle adoption for a 2045 emission-free transportation sector in California and high renewable energy penetration. So before I start the study, I just wanted to share with you some of the problems we have in California regarding the grid and how the COVID has also affected that problem. Probably you have heard the dog curve phenomena on the grid in California, that because this is a state that we have a lot of solar energy coming into the grid during daytime. During the evening that the solar is going down, we have a steep increase in the power plant generation, thermal power plant generations, like gas power plants. And that steep curve is making a curve something like a dog curve, and it's getting worse every year. Now I just compared these two curves when we had a complete shutdown in 2020, April 30th, and comparing to last year, which we had almost similar solar, so it shouldn't be the effect of solar increase in that day, but it's actually the difference between the shutdown and not having the shutdown. And that's, if you see the blue curve in the middle of the day, you're actually having that load because of the industry sector and other sectors active in the economy. But when you have a shutdown, that is the red curve, your load is going down. And the difference between that in 2019 and 20, it's about 2.6 gigawatt increase in the dog curve minimum max. And this is a case that we only had about 20% of renewables in California. If you go up to 60% in 2030, and our goal is near 100% in 2045. The more we go high in renewables, the more the dock curve effect is. And if there would be a shutdown in 2030, the effect would be much worse. So we have to prepare ourselves to have enough storage for those days, because in this day, we increased the dock curve 2.6 gigawatt, and we experienced some days that we had VR share of 60% in California because of that phenomenon. So again, on those days, CAISO has seen load reductions from 5 to 8% on weekdays and 1 to 4% on weekends. Larger drops were in the morning peak hours compared to the same period. And these figures are largely due to a shift from commercial restaurant and retail hubs to residential consumption during the evening. And as I told you, it goes up to some days to 60%. So we might look at this in the future. So today's presentation is about how we can actually provide sufficient seasonal storage to achieve 100% zero carbon electricity grid, which is our 2045 goal in California. And what would be the potential role of hydrogen infrastructure in a BEV-FCV combination for a sustainable path towards a zero emission energy system? And what could be the role of hydrogen infrastructure in seasonal storage for balancing variable renewable energy generation and vehicle hydrogen demand year-round? So what I have been developing up to now was a model, I call it CalZIV because we call it a California Zero Emission Energy System and Vehicle. Like early stage, it was only a Cal EV model because we were looking at only the EV vehicles, BEVs. But later we added ZEVs, that means all the hydrogen FCV vehicles and BEVs. And another E in the middle, that's an energy system because we are adding different sectors of the economy, not only transportation sector, but also going up to industry and other sectors. So this model has been an optimum, we're looking at the optimum BEV FCV fleet for years from 30 to all the way to 50, going to a zero emission grid. We're looking for long-term marginal price of hydrogen and other energy carriers like electricity, and optimal energy infrastructure for California transportation system, and achieving a win-win minimum cost zero emission energy system for California. So if you look at the structure of the model, it is a flexible multi-sector model, which is actually built on message platform. Message represents a model for energy supply strategy and their general environmental effects, was built decades ago in YASA in Europe, and was utilized for many purposes like as IPCC scenarios. And then I developed this model to look at the hourly that we need, and also to look at the regional base, and upgraded the transportation sector to look at what we have in California, and we would our policies for 2045 and 50. We are looking at the energy storage in the model. Besides hydro, we have the hydrogen storage and energy carriers. And this is a capacity expansion planning model for future periods. So besides having it as an 87, 60 hours per year or per period, the model is running multi-period. It's running for 2020, 30, 40, and all the way to 45, 50 in one model run. And also it's a multi-region model. So we are trying to have a model that looks everything together and optimizes the whole society for the suppliers and the consumers to get a win-win economy for both.
To what extent, if I can ask you a question, Behdad, to what extent is your model spatially resolved? So you're saying it's running on an hourly basis, right?
Yes.
Okay, so to what extent is it spatially resolved?
So if you look at the figure in this one, there is a, on the middle of the figure, you can see I have divided California in 5 major regions based on the information hourly load I could provide from the utilities. The region based is, it's flexible. I mean, we can choose what regions we want to use, how many they are. But for now, I chose to look at 5 major big regions that includes the 5 major utilities and integrated some other utilities in those 5 major to be able to, it's a demand driven. So I needed the hourly load for each region for the base year and the probable forecast for that load in the future.
So is it a dispatch model where you also have details of each power plant and details of the distribution, the electricity distribution system?
Yeah, so I included
transmission, sorry.
The existing capacity of the existing power plants for the base year of the model. That means for each region, we have all those thermal and other, mostly thermal power plants and solar and wind as well, and other types. Focusing mostly on gas power plants. Yeah, it works as a dispatch because it's looking at how it optimizes every hour of the year. So I can pull out from the results a typical summer day I would show in this presentation, and a typical winter day, that how the model is optimizing the generation and based on the demand that you need for your VMT purposes, right? Yeah, it works as both capacity expansion and also hourly generation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So this is a typical reference energy system for the model. You see that we can look at the energy chain from the supply, from all the way from the resources to the generation, power plants going into the transmission network, and from the transmission to distribution, and from distribution to the end use sectors. Now, at the end use sectors, which you see is in the green sectors, message is designed that we can look into the demand, and that's hourly demand of useful energy. That means for transportation, the service we need is the VMT, the hourly VMT we need for each region for people to travel. And if it's going to be residential, it could be like heat demand or cooling demand. And if it's industrial, the demand for heating or the direct induction induced for steel iron. So it looks at how much you need energy, and it tries to provide that energy through all these technologies from end use sectors to the conversion level. And beside the electricity system, below is the blue in hydrogen infrastructure. So if we have electrolysis made hydrogen from renewable or from the grid, it goes into a storage tank and delivered to distribution for fuel stations, or going to the industry sector to provide our hydrogen for steel, which we added in this model. And I will explain this model further on when we show the results. So here is a sample simulation for a 2050. It's just a simulation that if we had enough variable renewable energy, that's solar and wind, that the total energy in a year equals the total demand for that year. This is what it would look like in 2050 with all those intermittency that we are seeing in this figure. And if I open some days for you, you see that the VRE and load do really mismatch in different times of the year, especially summer and winter. So for the 141 hours or 100 something hours, I put the simulation in summer, you see that the orange is the VRE and the blue is the load, but the total VRE is much more than the load that we need. But in the winter time, a few days, you can see that orange is much lower than the load. So what you need is to take all those excess renewable energy from summer and take it all the way down to the winter times that you have lack of renewable energy. And with a simple simulation, you can see that you might have even 22 consecutive days of net shortage of VRE in this case. That would be about 13 terawatt hour of storage needed only for these days. And even if you have 100% of your vehicles in California BEVs, that's about 28 million of vehicles changed to BEVs, and you use the batteries of these vehicles for grid interaction, this would probably only handle 10% of the storage requirement. So they are not well suited for multi-day storage, but hydrogen storage with a hydrogen system built to provide fuel to vehicles might serve this purpose very well. So that's why we added the hydrogen infrastructure to our all BEV scenarios. So our main goal and objective is to add all the sectors, although we haven't gone through all of them, residential and commercial. But for now, we added the industry sector beside the transportation sector. Study the detailed hydrogen infrastructure for the 5 regions in California based on transportation energy demand for each region. But I have to mention that for now I had some CPU limitations. I ran the model with less regions. And then adding truck and heavy duty vehicles to California to CalZIP model for better analyzing the 2045 zero emission scenario. So for this purpose, beside the FCV LDVs and BEV LDVs, I added the long haul FCV and BEVs, the long haul BEVs as well to the transportation sector. And I went to different scenarios for BEV FCV combination for specifically 2045 for this presentation. So this is a model development for 2045.
What did you do for the demand for 2045, for example?
So for demand for 2045, I have the demand for the transportation sector based on my scenarios. When I go to I have like 3 scenarios here, 100% BEV or 100% FCV fleet, or 50-50 as a mid scenario. So when I want to find a load for 2045, I know I have some information about the load I need for my BEV's fleet and FCV's fleet, if any. And then I have other loads that goes to the load that is not including that BEV charging, but includes other sectors of the economy. And that's based on the CEC forecast for up to 2030, extending to go to 2045 for other sectors of the economy. So I have some other load in my simulations that represent those. And I have my own fleet and VMT for that provides me as an endogenous final energy hourly load that I need for my BEVs charging. So yeah, California electricity grid, we went to 90% of VRE for 45 for now. I'll explain you why the 100% would be more challenging, because it's more important to see how we want to go from 90 to 100% and keep the prices as economically optimum as possible. The model year 2045 has been targeted to better understand the zero carbon mandates for the grid, and all long haul trucks to be FCV or BEV HDVs in 2045. The steel industry that was added, it actually assumes 100% change from natural gas, direct reduced iron to hydrogen in 2045 for California. And as I told you, we have 3 scenarios: 100% BEV fleet, 50% BEV, 50% FCV, and 100% FCV fleet. So adding a new sectors, the long haul trucks, how I incorporated this sector to the model. My assumption was based on some simulations done by other groups, like 250,000 FCV long haul trucks in 2045. Assuming each long haul truck is going 100,000 VMT per year, and they have a 60 kilogram hydrogen tank, and assuming that in 2045, I can achieve a 11.3 moles per kilogram hydrogen fuel efficiency in that year for my long hauls. And the steel industry consumption is 3 million tons per year that we use the consumption for hydrogen. The DRI is 54 kilogram of hydrogen is required for each ton of steel production. I added this to the demand sector. On the right hand, you can see I added that long haul trucks, the BEVs, the FCV light duty, and on the above right corner is the steel industry, which all were added to the demand side of the model, and I had this hourly demand for that. One thing that the model can give you as an endogenous variable are the shadow prices. So is a model based on the demand-driven optimization model, and it looks at the total cost of the energy system, calculating the present value of the cost of all the technologies that can be installed in the future periods as well. That means if we want to install a hydrogen storage, or a hydrogen pipeline, or a hydrogen fuel station, or on the electric side, we want to install fast chargers, it takes all the information such as capital cost, fixed operation and maintenance cost, variable O&M cost, plant factor, lifetime of the plants, and efficiency, and so on. So it provides, based on the demand, how much should be installed in each year or in each period, and within H760, how it's optimizing the actually activity of the technologies.
So where did you, potentially this is a tremendous amount of data. Where did you get all this information, especially information that pertains to the technical characteristics of each plant?
So a lot of data was obtained from the eGrid information. They have a very good database regarding all the power plants in California, and also their thermal efficiencies. We have that data. Actually, we also maybe published some part of that data in my project for Caltrans, that we have the database on that project. If you go into that Caltrans project that I did for highway rest areas, we have included many of this information in that database.
Thank you.
No problem. So this is an example of...
Behdad, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Are there any capacity constraints on the what you call the primary energy resources?
Yeah. So for the thermal power plants, it's mostly the gas power plants that I didn't consider any constraint on gas resources for now. I included a price for the gas, that how much would be the price of gas that the thermal plant will be using. For the wind and solar, when we are going to 90% or near 100%, the constraints allow me to simulate the regime of the wind and solar, because there are constraints that we don't have solar during the nighttime. That's the constraints that I have per hour, for hourly, 760 hours of the year for these two resources.
And so the costs of these alternative sources of energy, like hydrogen, the cost of producing hydrogen, for example, how is that represented or modeled? Because you're looking out to 2045, right? So
yes,
there could be great uncertainty with respect to technological development and the costs associated with that.
Yeah. So for hydrogen, for example, we have these electrolysis plants that for base year, we don't have such plans, and the models should actually install those plans by 2045, and it is doing so. So the plans information, the capital cost, and the techno-economic information of the plans was inputted to the model for each period, and we assume a decrease in the capital cost based on scenarios we have from studies we have from NREL, that how much they are forecasting the cost of a electrolysis plant is going to be reduced by 2045 or 50, and we use in the future periods.
Okay, so what is the actual output of the model?
So the actual output of the model, I'm just going to go to it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, one of the output is the price, it's a shadow price. You can get the average shadow price for each part of the energy system. So this is a sample output for each hour. You can get it from output of variable renewable energy, solar and wind, or you can get it from the inside the car, where the electricity is going after being charged from the battery to the motor. So it's very flexible how you design a model, how much you go inside each technology, and for each part of that model, you can get the shadow price. Another thing is that I added the electrolysis plants, so the model can decide if it's going to get it from VRE only, is green hydrogen, or from the gas power plant to the grid and grid to hydrogen, which is including the VRE up to 90%. And this is like gray hydrogen, but if we add the carbon capture and sequestration to the gas power plant, it would become a blue hydrogen. So because it's a 90% grade, I showed it as a blue, but that's something else that we are going to add to the model. So I show you these curves, and I want to show you some results as Steve asked me. Some of the results are how much capacity are needed for each technology. So when I say technology, it's not only the power plants that they're showing you, it's all the technology within the energy levels of that picture I showed you. That means the storage tank, the pipeline, the electrolysis plants, the fast chargers in the demand side, or how much capacity we need for hydrogen fuel stations to provide that filling H2 dispensing capacity needed for all those VMT FCVs that would be available for 2045. So the output of the model is many things. First, how much optimum capacity of each technology we need, and beside that, I'm showing the hourly output as well. It's a prices, is an endogenous output for hourly, but I'll show you in the next slides that how I go into the hourly production of the thermal plants and how much it's actually produced by electrolysis plants and so on and so forth. So in this scenario, that is a 50-50 FCV BEV scenario for 2045. We have a 294 gigawatt of solar, 60 gigawatt of wind, 54 gigawatt of gas, and 31 gigawatt of gas to power, which is producing electricity from hydrogen by fuel cells. And currently, as I told you, the reason going above 10% is not impossible, but we are going to go it precisely because we want to make sure the prices are remain low and we are in an economically viable area. The gas plants might be still needed for grid stability. That's another reason. And the cost of carbon capture and LCFS might be less and enable us to go to 100% if you have a very good LCFS policy in place. So
excuse me. So when you on that slide, when you said you referred to the optimal capacities, it's optimal in what sense? There's an objective function driving this? What's being optimized?
The objective function is minimizing the total cost of the system. That means the total cost of installing all these power plants and the total cost of installing all the infrastructure, like gas pipelines, charging stations, grid, if you need to add the grid capacity because of more BEV charging. So the cost of all this is the present value is calculated, and that's the objective function would be minimized. And based on what cost, it's actually installing all those capacities.
So things like emissions, greenhouse gases, they're calculated subsequently after the optimization is performed.
Yeah, it's simultaneously calculated by the model that like how much CO2 is emitted from the gas power plants per hour. It's one of the outputs. Now you can add a cost to that carbon as a carbon cost and put a tax on it as a carbon tax, or you can put a limitation on the carbon emission, and that would be another constraint that I haven't put that constraint yet.
I see.
But it's not in the current results, correct?
The carbon constraint is not here, but I have put $100 per ton of tax on the carbon as the LCFS policy. And then I can put a negative price on hydrogen that I haven't done that. So that's the future work. I can put a minus 2.9 per kilogram hydrogen as the CARB says.
No, I understand that. You know, one thing that I'm not clear about is the level of details of the model. I mean, you've told us, oh, I'm taking into account, you know, I know the characteristics of each power plant. I know my model takes into account transmission and distribution. So really? I mean, because this would be a tremendous amount of data. So are you really doing transmission and distribution? And for example, solar, as you know, there was a million solar roof initiative in California, right? So you have hundreds of thousands of houses that have their own solar panels. So is this also into your model or it's not?
Yeah, so how detailed I go to spatial, for now, it's not so much detailed, and I have aggregated all those information into specific technologies, like a gas power plant that represents the whole region and can produce that electricity for that region.
Okay, so for each region, you have one representative plant?
Yes, yes. So it's a representation for the region that I am actually having in the model. Now, going into more detail in that region, it requires more CPU time, more detailed study, and that's future work that I'm linking or going more detail in the spatial aspect. But now it's more aggregated, you know, for the whole California and the main regions that I have accumulated all those load in that region.
So how can you take into account transmission or distribution costs if you don't really have a spatial component here?
Yeah, so we have installed capacity. We have, like for the base year 2017, we have a certain installed capacity for each region of that transmission lines. And the capacity and the transmission capacity that is going between region 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. We have those capacity available as an installed capacity. The distance between the regions is considered something that can represent what we have between those regions and how much actually energy loss we have in those regions because of energy transfer between regions. So this is the detail that I am going to the 5 regions is a detail that a model like a switch, if you're familiar with switch or other some regional models we have, are assuming about a very big like transmission line between these 2 regions and having a capacity constraint and how the model need to add to that capacity because you need more electricity transmitted between the regions.
No, I know how to do it. I'm just wondering if it's shown, you know, if it's included in the results that you're presenting.
So no, what I'm presenting right now is a very aggregated results for the whole California. I haven't produced the results for between the regions in the model.
Okay.
Divide the power plants between regions, but now I'm starting to show the results for the whole region. And as I told you in the beginning, some CPU limitations I'm changing the computer and enhancing these hardwares. But for this reason, right now the model took couple of days to get optimal solution. So I had to limit the regions for now for the whole California, and then looking at the energy trade between the regions with future versions.
So, Behdad, when you talk about transmission distribution, you've got one region, a huge region for Northern California. Is it essentially aggregated into sort of a single representation for that whole region, Northern California?
So we have distributed the regions. If I go back to the first one, like this, and we have I have showed on the lines. It's very small, but I have showed on the lines what are the capacity for the lines big regions. It might be about like 3 gigawatt capacity. So when I say I have a 62 gigawatt of load, of peak load, that 62 gigawatt is actually distributed between these capacity lines, and could be like 24 gigawatt between two regions, 10 gigawatt between other two regions. But with the peak load, you might have totally a peak load of 64 gigawatt for 2017. That's how I'm actually now modeling, but going more details give me more precise information regarding the transmission distribution, of course.
Okay. So given, maybe this is what you're looking at in the future, but that huge Northern California region has a number of cities, right? It's got the Bay Area, Sacramento, and some smaller but still significant sized cities, maybe Central Valley. Is it practical? Maybe it's a computational question, but is it practical to disaggregate that region further, maybe by urban, rural, and the larger cities, or does it just blow up the CPU time?
Well, I think we have to look at what we are our goal for each one. This is a very aggregated aggregated run for the whole 5 region as a one. But I want to go into one region and look inside that, then maybe I can divide that single region into another 10 region and run it for that region. And run the whole 5 region in such a model like this.
I see.
There are things that we have to look. I mean, it's a CPU time, is a computer and the limitations. If you want to have all the 760 hours and all those technologies, hydrogen and electricity grid, and all those subsectors, there are some CPU and hardware limitations that we want to avoid. I know that there are some models like Energy Pathways, E3. They are not looking at a 760, but they're looking at 24 hours for each month. And so they have 24 times 12 time slices for each year. And that enhances the computing time, but that limits our look into how we are looking at the real thing in the future, the wind and solar and charging BEVs for the 760, looking at all the capacity to be installed in a year. They wouldn't be able to show that as detailed that we are able to show it like this.
I see. And so what's the runtime of the model roughly at the moment for the state?
So it went up to 4 hours. I reduced and I simplified it to run it for one whole region. It came down to 10 hours. And I decided to go and have these results with having one whole region and actually averaging all the 5 regions into one big region like this.
Okay, thank you.
I'm still not very clear. So is it correct that for each region, you have one representative plant for each technology?
Yes, yes.
So what is the link between the physical characteristics of that plant and the actual infrastructure? Because they may have a different age, they may have different efficiency. I mean, there are many things that come into play, different costs. So how do you know you know, how do you
Yeah,
go
I mean,
from
we can
multiple
go.
plants to one
Yeah, we can go
plant?
like having in one region, um, defining 10 different gas power plants in the model with 10 different efficiencies. And
So is that what you did then? All
but
these
I
results?
average all that power plants into one big power plant with the average efficiency of all those power plants, and decided to run the model with this to get a result, and then if necessary go into more detail. But the thing is that I have included all the historical capacities within the last 10 or 20 years for all the power plants that were installed in different time periods. Like if there was one installed in 1990, I have that in the model, and this power plant has a lifetime of like if 30 years. After 30 years, the model is actually terminating the power plant and should install a new power plant in after like in 2020, right? So
Not necessarily, right? I mean, in many cases, many different types of plants are retrofitted and their life is expanded. I mean, it's true, of course, for nuclear power plants. We don't have that many in California anymore. But it's also true for thermal plants, right?
Exactly. I mean, the model is flexible. You can put a 50-year lifetime, and within the period increase the variable and fixed O&M within the future years because it's getting older. So it's up to you how to define the problem and how detailed you want to go into the power plant configuration. But as you add these technologies, you are adding your CPU time and adding all these things. So it's important to have those. I agree with you, but I went into a scenario that gives me a result that it's actually acceptable for a whole aggregate system. But if I want to go into more details, I can, and I can enhance the model to go into very detailed plant configuration if I want.
No, I'm pretty sure you can. But my question is, what is the impact of this aggregation on the quality of the solution? You see what I mean?
Yeah, of course, the quality enhances. You can get more specific, more quality results for each distributed region within each city, or how the power plants. But yeah, for now, I'm looking at the whole California ISO CAISO grid and how would be the effect of power plants on the grid, right? So I didn't go into the details for that reason. I thought it wouldn't be necessary for the purpose of looking at the transportation sector specifically and how they can affect the grid.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So a typical day that I have figured out for 2045 is June 29th. This is a VRE production in that day. And dark brown is the gas to power, which the model has chosen. There's no thermal generation in that day, and there's no V2G required. The stack bars are the load in that day. Now, you see a lot of solar is wasted and curtailed. The reason is because there's a deep point between how much hydrogen infrastructure you want to install to avoid curtailment because of the cheap solar you have in that year. So the model has decided to install a certified, specific amount of storage and pipeline, but to curtail this much of solar energy to keep the costs low as possible. So that's up to 90% VRE in the grid. The grid load is shown on the lower level. The red part is the electrolysis from grid, and dark blue is the electrolysis directly from VRE, which is green hydrogen. And you see there is some grid to vehicles also getting electricity from grid to charge the vehicles. Another day is a winter day. We have much less solar we need to have some thermal generation, although we had hydrogen storage and infrastructure and G2P, but it's cheaper to have the thermal generation, like gas power plants. And on top of it, we have some gas to power, but not all of it.
You know, I have another quick question for you.
Yes.
So you split California into several regions, right? Are these regions, I mean, are you modeling the fact that we are part of the Western grid and that we can export some of the extra power we are generating to other parts of the Western grid that may actually need it? Because I mean, we are a couple of hours ahead behind, I'm sorry, some other parts of the Western grid. So it may be dark there, we have a lot of sun, we can send them power, right? Or this, in this exercise, this is not done at this point.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question. Actually, yeah, I was looking at that when I was doing work at British Columbia, and we were looking at the WEC region and how we can use the time difference in utilizing the storage. That's a very good thing that to add it to the model in the future steps. But now, no, I didn't include that time difference and the export opportunities that we would have.
You know, likewise for imports, right? We could import power when needed. So that's the whole point, the whole reason for being interconnected.
Exactly. So the model can choose the import based on the price of electricity or even hydrogen. And for the export, you have to expand your regional to include that WEC regions to see how it actually trades the energy between the regions.
Thank you.
So in the winter, you're welcome. In the winter, you can see that we have a lot of load that is covered by the renewable and the remaining is covered by the thermal. And the electrolysis is what needed for the hydrogen. In this figure, you see the output, the optimal output for the hydrogen infrastructure and electrolysis plants going into the storage. Bulk storage. So the green lines, the green bars are the electrolysis produced in that summer day. The blue areas are the hydrogen dispensers actually needing hydrogen for fueling the cars, fueling the HDV, the long hauls, and fueling the LDV cars, FCVs. As you remember, this is a 50% FCV scenario. And the green, red part is electrolysis produced from the grid, from the 90% VRE grid. If you see, we are producing much more electrolysis than we require in a day, but the excess electrolysis is going into the hydrogen tank to be stored during the summer, that we would be actually using that hydrogen during the winter. So the orange line is the level of hydrogen stored in the tanks that is being utilized during the winter time, a typical day in the winter. And because we are making much less electrolysis during that day because of less VRE, and we are providing the hydrogen from the hydrogen stored during the summer. So this is the balance between the hydrogen production and hydrogen demand during the BEV FCV scenario. At the left side, you see hydrogen production, how much is a green hydrogen electrolysis produced, and how much is it produced from the grid. And the right-hand side is how much hydrogen is used to produce electricity by gas to power technology, to fuel the vehicles, HDV vehicles, and to fuel the LDV vehicles, and how much is going to the steel industry, which is very low for now. And this curve is showing the infrastructure needed to be installed and the respective capacity factors that is actually endogenously produced by the model. So the model is saying for each hour, how much hydrogen should be produced through the plants, and how much of this hydrogen is going into the pipelines, to the tank, and how much is distributed from the tank to the fuel stations or the steel industry or the gas to power, and how much gas to power plants we want to install. And it's all given as an output by the model. This is another output of the model. It's showing the CO2 emissions per hour from the thermal plants during the year. And the first day of the year is the first day of January. So during the winter, you need to have more production of hydrogen to actually support your hydrogen needs. And it's comparing it to the VRE. As you see, when there's more VRE, you need less thermal generation. So if you want to compare the three scenarios, all BEV, BEV FCV, and all FCV, you would get some interesting results. For example, for an all BEV scenario, I'm showing you only this one as we don't have much time left. We see that although during the summer, you have a lot of curtailment, but during the winter, it's actually helping to sell the electricity from the V2G, from the batteries of the vehicle to the grid, and a later time of the day, other types of vehicles, like if light duty are selling it, and at other time of the day, the heavy duty using it from the grid. So the batteries are being utilized daily based as a storage device because of V2G possibility. And that can happen in any scenario, but the main thing, if you compare it, you see that the more you go towards FCV, the less you have curtailment and losses on the whole energy system for electricity, of course. So if you have an 89% emission-free grid, that's, I'm looking at the further right-hand side of the graph, which is all FCV. You would achieve a 19% VRE curtailment T&D loss in that grid. But if you have all BEV scenario, you might have go up to 34% of VRE curtailment and T&D losses, but keeping in mind that you might be able to go to a 94% emission-free grid. And in between, you are in a 23% VRE curtailment and T&D losses altogether. So it's important to compare the scenarios and figure out how it affects the grid. Like for the all BEV scenario, it's very normal that it shows that you have to install more transmission lines probably because your load goes higher during peak hours. But that's a total load in the total grid in CAISO. Right now, like it's 64 gigawatt, but it might go as high as 120. And for this reason, you might need to install more capacity expansion, capacity lines or transmission lines between the regions. For BEV FCV, something between, and for all FCV, less transmission lines, and comparing the peak load of 2017. Now, if I want to compare the all BEV, BEV FCV, and all FCV for the hydrogen infrastructure, for all BEV, as you know, we don't have any FCV, so you don't need any fuel stations for hydrogen. And what's happening is that you're only producing hydrogen by electrolysis going to the hydrogen tank, and during the winter time, the hydrogen is going into the gas to power and producing electricity only during specific hours of the day, which is the peak time you need electricity. For BEV FCV, it's something that you need to provide hydrogen for your fleet as well. For an all FCV, you're providing mostly for your fleet and a small part for your grid. So here I'm comparing actually all BEV hydrogen infrastructure installed capacity. As you know, I compared before for the electricity's part, but this is for the electrolysis part. And if I compare it for a BEV FCV scenario, we have a better capacity factors within our installed capacity. And if you add the capacity factor for the electrolysis plant, you can go as high as 70 to 70% capacity factor when you are having an electricity plant that will be connected both to grid and directly to the VRE plants. And then this is the case for all FCV. So again, we can have the cost, and within these assumptions that I had in this run for the capital cost and all these technologies that I had in the model, I can say that for the electricity cost and all FCV, I might go to a higher electricity cost, but for the hydrogen cost, and the state FCV can have a lower hydrogen cost rather than all FCV. And this is very integrated system. That means when I say an all FCV scenario, that doesn't mean I don't have hydrogen. That means I'm producing part of my grid by gas to power, which is expensive. And because I want to go to 90 above % grid, right? So it's not only calculating the cost of the fuel of the cars, but calculating all the costs that I want to achieve a 90% grid. So for the future work, I'm looking at improving the LDV and HDV transportation sector, total cost and charging behavior, add carbon capture sequestration to the gas power plant towards emission-free grid, and complete the run to include all 5 major regions and having a more detailed spatial model. As you guys also mentioned, it's important to go into these regions, and add the time periods to be able to understand interim policies, add LCFS current H2 credit and possible policy for an optimum LCFS policy, which is possible with this model configuration that I have in hand, and adding other industrial sectors like cement, which is a very high intensive industry if you want to add hydrogen to it, residential sector, commercial sector, and H2 end use consumers, to be able to look at the hydrogen infrastructure much more detailed and higher capacity factors. So thank you very much, and I would be happy to answer any questions remaining by the IDSs.
Okay, I'll jump in. This seems like a very complex model. How does one validate a model like this, Behdad? I mean, is it even possible to do any sort of validation? How do you know?
Yes, I mean, the way that we validate a complex model is by sensitivity analysis and of the scenario. So the best way is to change the parameters, see how it behaves, how the outputs are changed, and if it's rational, and the analysis so correct outputs and the differences are compared. We can almost rely on it, and we can compare with some other studies, but I don't think I have seen a detailed study to look in this way into the energy system as I've done. There are studies looking at the supply chains, maybe not going all through the VNT, or maybe some studies on the demand side, but not going all the way through the generation as a whole integrated system and all like 60 hours in one run. So yeah, this is something that I wanted to discover and the advantages that I thought would bring for us.
Behdad, is this work already published? Do you have a paper or report that summarizes your presentation and gives more details?
So this is recent results. We are publishing, we are writing the paper and the report on it. I have some other work that has been published, maybe earlier stages of this work that have been published at this scholarship, or we have a Caltrans project for rest areas that have been published. That's more intercity traveling compared to intracity as a whole. So I can send you my publications. I think Rich also has, but for this specific scenario I showed you, no, we are just writing the papers.
Thank you. Yeah, we'd be interested in publications using the same tools that you featured today.
Oh, sure, yeah. I would be happy to introduce you the tools and the background of message and how the formulation is actually there that we developed and have this model, like how it became like this model that I'm introducing.
Hi, this is Craig Wren. Hi, how you doing? Dr. Ritchie had to step off. He had another call, so he asked me to take up the moderation. I had a question in terms of, I understand your choices of mixes between battery electric and fuel cell were kind of to test the ranges. Have you looked at what a realistic mix in terms of fleet needs would look like in terms of battery electric capability as projected in 2045 and fuel cell capability in 2045? What a realistic mix would look like, including cost considerations for the vehicles, et cetera. So are any of these mixes in the scenarios you run, are they realistic in terms of what fleets would be willing to purchase? Because ultimately, you know, unless they're specifically told exactly what technologies they have, they're going to have a choice. So how will you, have you considered what a realistic mix of battery electric versus fuel cell?
Exactly. So what I have been looking into these technologies is the energy side, and how the model is looking at how much the energy would cost for a mile of travel for these BEVs, FCVs, or long hauls. And based on energy cost, which is endogenously produced by the model is looking at the infrastructure. Now, for these scenarios, as you say, I have fixed the share of BEVs and FCVs, but I'm very interested to take out the constraint and let the model choose between what's the best combination of FCV and BEV fleet to being able to achieve 100% emission-free or carbon-free grid with a minimum cost. Saying that this would be only including the energy cost of the vehicles, but the model is capable to add the investment cost in the vehicles or the battery cost or whatever cost associated with the fleet that you have to actually compare this fleet together. You can, just like a power plant that you can have the capital cost and the fixed O&M, you can have this cost for the fleet, which I assumed for now that the fleet have a zero cost for battery, because I consider it as a sunk cost, as people when purchase an electric vehicle for driving means. That battery is available free for the utility purposes, and they can be paid based on the selling of the electricity. So we can make some assumptions of having them as a sunk cost, or we can add costs to those technologies in the vehicles or between vehicles, and let the model choose which would be the best configuration of the fleet to achieve 100% zero carbon grid.
Okay, but again, what the best configuration is for a particular fleet would depend on the duty cycles that fleet is operating and the capabilities of the technology and the location of infrastructure. I guess what I'm getting at is, the resolution necessary to understand, the combination of technologies that various sectors would use is maybe more complex than an aggregate model can reflect.
Yes, that's important. I mean, if there is a change in there's a fleet for long haul and they have a specific VMT to meet, then that should be added a constraint to the model, because I don't have that. I don't have that specific requirement for the long haul fleets, that how they are traveling, or maybe we should have it and add it as a constraint. But that's important for each group of fleet to be looked separately and added to the model, and let the model know what are the requirements us based on the travel needs, and based on that VMT requirement, give us a very optimal energy system to meet those requirements. That's the purpose of the model.
Okay. Are there additional questions? So check on chat. Okay. Okay. If there's nothing else, I'd just like to thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative, and for fielding all the questions that we had for you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your time to being here and having me at your place. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. I guess that concludes the seminar for today, everybody. Thanks for attending, and we'll follow up with the reports and the papers that you mentioned. If you could share those,
sure.
We'll make those available to everybody, and then we're also going to post this seminar on the ITS website. So again, thank you everybody for your participation, and special thanks to Kiani for his presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.